Hello everyone, what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at the XH2 and the X-T5's 40 megapixel sensors, and we're going to look at how they are able to do high ISO and check them out a little bit at some extreme ranges, and also compare them to one of the other cameras that I have, the Sony A7IV, and we'll see what's going on. So first of all, this is unscientific. We are just comparing the Fuji 40 megapixel sensors to a full frame sensor. And we're also going to use Adobe Lightroom Classic. And I know there are some of you purists out there who tell me that there's no way that these comparisons make any sense and all that stuff. And I guess in my opinion, and knowing enough photographers that I know, for most of us, most people are going to use Lightroom. And most people are going to be looking at how, for instance, these files, the high ISO, do compare to the A7IV, because I've gotten that question plenty of times. And so I think these comparisons are pretty decent, right? So this comparison right here is the A7IV versus the XH2 in the studio. Just some easy setups. The light was not super terrible, but it wasn't super bright, and I started at ISO 400 here. And if we go to the comparison mode, I have the Sony on the left and then the Fuji XH2 on the right. They're both a 35 millimeter full frame equivalent, so I'm using the newer 23 millimeter 1.4 WR from Fuji, one of those new awesome lenses that do a pretty good job. And let's get rid of this. If we zoom in on these at ISO 400, it's pretty much indistinguishable, right? We actually don't see much of a change, very much at all, until maybe we get up here to 800. And then you can start to see a little bit of a change. And it's very, very slight, right? So you have just a touch more grain. If you look in the background area, some of the dark areas, this is the A7IV over here, and this is the Fuji. So not a lot. So that's ISO 800. Let's go to, let's see, what is that? 1,000. Let's go to a skip. Let's go to 1,600. The difference starts to become more apparent, especially when you look at the background. But I will say that if you look at the details on both shots, the details are really, really good. So over here on the right is the XH2 with the 23 millimeter 1.4, and the details look fantastic, and the grain doesn't look that bad. So even when you look in the back, the A7IV is just maybe a touch cleaner, but gosh, it's really hard to even see that, right? It's tough. Maybe when you look in the details of this light bulb thingy here, you can see a little bit of a difference, but not too much, right? So even at 1,600, these things are pretty close. Let's go to 3,200, and let's get on some of these details. I can read the text in both of these really, really easily. Everything looks really good on both of these files. I have no problems, no issues with either of them. When you go into the shadows, again, that's usually when you can start to see the differences in grain, and the XH2 has more grain at 3,200, but it's totally usable in my opinion. Let's go to 6,400. Now on the left, again, is the Sony. On the right is the Fuji. We definitely have more grain in the Fuji, but not that big of a deal. Honestly, they look pretty close. When you consider that the Fuji actually has more megapixels, this is wildly impressive, in my opinion. It looks amazing. Even on the Fuji, you can see some pretty good amount of details on the filter right there, right? It looks really good. I could see the details in the finish. The Sony is clearer and a little bit cleaner, but oh man, we're going in, we're zooming in, and I think that it's one of those things where a print is going to be amazing. Prints always look a little bit better than what you look at on the screen at 100%. Usually the ink bleeds a little bit. So I think at prints, you're going to be hard pressed to see much of a difference. That they both look awesome, even at ISO 6400. Maybe my tolerance for high ISO has changed over the years. I think this is amazing. We're asking so much out of these cameras. I have rarely seen situations where I'm shooting much above ISO 6400. I'm going to show you some situations here in a little bit, just to kind of push the Fuji XH2 and the X-T5. But let's go to 8,000. Still decent comparison. The Fuji is definitely blockier. There's slightly more detail. Like if you look at the glass in each of these, the glass just looks a little bit sharper. Same thing on the camera itself, that old camera. But this is usable, right? I mean, look at that. ISO 8000 on a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor. doesn't look too bad. And I'm even using Lightroom Classic, which many Fuji purists would yell at me for. And you might be yelling at me right now for it. Let's go to ISO 10,000. No, let's skip that. Let's go to ISO. This is where it gets crazy. 12,800. Grainy as heck. Much grainier, I think. Less details on the Fuji, but still usable in my opinion. All right, I think that it's still usable. That looks pretty decent. When you get in the background though, and some of those shadow areas, when you start to see the Fuji breaking down quite a bit more. Just to let you know, I don't have any kind of settings applied except for the default Lightroom settings. And again, if you want to have different results, if you're not happy with the Lightroom Classic results with Fuji files, then you could use whatever raw converter you use. But most of my students that I've had in real life, they're not going to go chasing a bunch of different programs. They're usually using Lightroom. They're usually using Photoshop, and I'm gonna use the thing that most people use. And yeah, so you can definitely see that there's more detail in the Sony file at this point, quite a bit more. But still, we're talking about ISO 12,000. Now we're gonna go to 25,000. This is where the Fuji gets worse and worse. You can see a whole bunch of chunky grain, and then we're gonna get crazy, and we're gonna look at 51,000. And we'll see that the Fuji is definitely like breaking apart quite a bit more. All right. Another scene just to look at, a little bit slightly different color. We'll look at, we'll just look at the end of the spectrum here. Okay. So that's ISO 12,000. The Sony again is on the left. Fuji's on the right. Definitely a lot more grain on the Fuji, but it's not too bad. Right. That looks decent. Both of those look decent. You know, there's a little less contrast. The exposure, I just put these on automatic program mode and switched only the ISO and on both cameras and just focus on the same spot. So, you know, they render things a little bit differently. But I mean, most of these tests are really, really close. So if I go down to 8,000, both of those are usable. The Fuji is a little bit more grainy, but if we go to 25,000, the Fuji gets pretty bad. And at 51,000, the Fuji is really bad, right? I've honestly looked at cleaning up both of these files, and the Sony at 51,000 actually cleans up pretty well. Actually, let's go and look at a picture, a comparison of these cleaned up fairly well through using some denoising. Both files from the Sony A7IV and the XH2 through the Photolab Deep Prime. Basically just chose Deep Prime and let the default settings rip. This is the XH2. This is at ISO 51,000 cleaned up, and that looks pretty good. That's at 200%. So at 100%, that's like actually usable, even though it's a little soft. You can see that's a little soft, but man, this is a decent file. So we can see some little kind of looks almost like hot pixels in the background. But man, the ability for us to be able to take some of these photographs in dark situations and then clean them up really has totally changed the game in 2023 to the point where I don't think we should worry too much about high ISO anymore. This stuff's pretty amazing. And then this is Deep Prime on the Sony file. And as you can see, the default settings didn't do as good of a job in some areas. Like it kind of artificially cleaned up the background, but it's trying. We could clean that up. We could tweak it a little bit, but you can definitely see that the Sony has some more information to work with as far as like it cleaned up and it did a better job on the details here compared to the ones over here. They both look really good. They both look fine. It's just a little bit better on the Sony, as you can see right there. That the statue or whatever that thing is, the desk decoration looks a little bit better than the Fuji, which is a little softer. But man, this is ISO 51,000. Who's going to use that? Not very many people, unless there's maybe an alien landing and you got to get that shot and it's really dark. You're going to use ISO 51,000 or 102,000, whatever you need to do, right? But generally, we're not going to need that stuff very often. And it's kind of nice to know that we at least get semi-usable images in those extreme situations, no matter what camera you basically have today. And it's even more impressive that the 40 megapixels stands up pretty well for not us. Sorry, I just hit the mic. For us not working very hard, right? This is just like basically on auto settings. I'm not changing anything. I'm not taking time to do this. So if you spent more time on some of these files, I think we'd get better results. One of the things that I don't like doing too much is high ISO tests and like decent light. So these examples were actually decent light, but the whole idea for me personally, my use of high ISO sometimes is just in situations where I have no other option. I have to boost that ISO up like crazy. So I actually went out and, you know, and the reason why is because in good light, high ISO looks different, right? Or in decent light even. So like this photo, for instance, right here, this is a ISO 10,000 shot with micro 4/3. It's with, and it looks great. It was an accident. I did not mean to shoot at ISO 10,000, but it was good light and the grain looks almost like very minimal, right? So you'd be like, wow, this thing does an amazing job with ISO 10,000. And, but in poor light, that changes everything, right? So what I did is I took the XT5 and I went out into a nature reserve, like basically at sunset. The sun was setting when I got there. It was like, I'm using ISO 1000, I think here. Yeah, 1000. It's very dark and I'm using the 2.8 as my maximum aperture. So this is one of those situations. Let's say I have this camera and I happen to be on vacation and I wanted to take some photos. And it's the only time I'll be at a location. So I have to use high ISO. What kind of results can I expect? And for the XT5 is what I'm using here. They're decent, right? So, you know, you can see everything's a little bit underexposed because I kind of had to. One of the things about this day, this is the reason why this is a pretty decent test for me, is because it was also windy. There was a storm coming in. So the wind was hitting this stuff and I needed to keep my shutter speed pretty high. And so I'm talking like 250 or above. So I had a combination of dark light and I needed to keep my shutter speed high or else I was going to get blurry shots. You can even see some of these, there's just a little bit of movement. So we're rocking pretty good until around right there. I know I need to raise my shutter speed because the wind is hitting me a little bit more and it's getting darker. So I have to go up to like 5,000 on my ISO. So that's what I did on some of these shots. And you could see that they are fairly grainy. We're not gonna look at every one. That's a very nice one. I thought this was ISO 6400, but this is 5000 and it looks beautiful. That's one of those things that look, I love this shot a lot. And we keep going and you know, the detail is there at ISO 5000. I like this. You know, remember, this is a tough condition. So it's, everything's moving around way more than I thought. And even though we have some movement in here, it's still a nice, pleasing photograph. And we have some grain. I don't mind it too much, right? So 5,000 for me was actually kind of workable. I thought it was decent. And if we go here, you know, I'm doing all right. There's a lot of detail there. ISO 5000 looks pretty good. ISO 5000 again looks decent. I don't mind it at all. You know, your tolerance for high ISO will differ. Mine is pretty decent on this. Let's go to a couple of these where I have to keep raising it. I think right around there, I'm at ISO 8000. The light is getting continually dimmer. You know, I still like some of these shots though. I mean, look at all that detail that is still there. That's pretty good. 40 megapixels APS-C. We have good detail at ISO 8000. And the shadows are dark and the shadows are not perfect even remotely, right? There's some problems, but for me, pushing it in a situation that's pretty unnatural, I would almost never do this. I think they look pretty good, right? You can see there's not much light to work with. It's getting darker and darker and the wind is still blowing. So I need to keep my shutter high, but I'm able to get some decent shots, right? Not too terribly bad. You know, ISO 8000, it's pretty grainy in there. This thing was moving like crazy. So I was trying to capture it in the wind and it was a struggle every single time. And the light's getting dimmer and dimmer. You can see me start to change. I'll go to ISO 10,000. This is where some of the details do start to, I think, fall apart a little bit. Way too underexposed. You can see some definite problems with the grain in the background, some patterns that are not cool. This was, again, this thing was moving like crazy, and I'm just trying to capture anything. And at this point, I'm really struggling. Just in general, I'm struggling. But I did want to show you, I took some of these ISO 8000 shots and ran them through Deep Prime. And wow, you know, there's grain in here, but it looks super natural. It looks, to me, it looks like film-like, right? It looks very nice at ISO 8000. The colors, it looks great. This is another one, ISO 8000, that was cleaned up using Deep Prime on the DxO Photo Lab. Looks amazing, and I'm getting detail. It's not perfect. It's just a touch soft. But it would make a really good print if this was something that I would like to print. And I think that overall the file looks great. So the idea that I'm going out and testing this stuff out and I'm kind of seeing what they look like in situations that I'm absolutely pushing it. What this teaches me and your tolerance might change, and you'll probably have better noise reductions abilities, all that stuff. It's teaching me that I can use this in pretty low light situations and get pretty decent results, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of the studio test shots that I did. I'm going to go ahead and put that down below for you to download. I'll do from like 8,000 to 51,000. And then you could like look at the files and you could put them in your raw converter that you like, and you can kind of do some of your own tests and see what you think for these files. So I hope this was fun. I hope this was insightful. You know, one of the things I think would be maybe good to bring up is that I have a photo community called the Positive Photo Community, where if you're interested in stuff like this, or you have questions and you want to share your own experiences, it's a great way to do that. I love YouTube, but it's not a great community platform. Comments, I don't even see all the comments sometimes. They get lost. Comments on comments get lost. And then also, I'm kind of running out of patience for social media and a lot of the know-it-alls and a lot of the negativity and a lot of the ads that are out there in general. And I built this community for us to be able to get together and have a good time and just kind of do good things together as photographers, pushing forward together. So I might see you there. I'll put the links below. Remember, you can download some of the raw files to test out yourself, but have a wonderful day.